Hi, welcome back to The Basement. I'm Steve Lewis. In this episode, we'll conclude our look at Mike Love's late 70s side project, Celebration. Last time we got as far as discussing the cover of their 1979 self-titled album. Now let's take a look at the music contained inside. Mike is the writer or co-writer on half of the album's 10 tracks. The other half are written by some combination of former King Harvest members Ron Altbach, Dave Robinson, and Ed Talea. Mike takes the lead vocal on 3 of his songs and 1 by Talea and Altbach. 5 are sung by Robinson and 1 by Paul Feuerso. Mike kicks off the album with a remake of Smiley Smile's Gettin' Hungry, which was also released as a single, credited to Brian Wilson and Mike Love in 1967. I gotta give Mike credit here for making an interesting choice. Had this been 10 or 15 years later, I have no doubt that he would have gone with one of the old standbys like 409 or Do It Again, and tried as much as possible to replicate the sound of the original. With the quirkiness of the Smiley Smile version, Gettin' Hungry seems like a nice choice not only for a remake, but for a reinterpretation. What we get is kind of an enjoyable disco to reggae interpretation with some nice guitar and an understated lead from Mike that sounds like his vocal work on the MIU album. As we discussed when we talked about that album, Mike was actually doing some of his best vocal work around this time before that nasal self-parody that he would fall into in the early 80s set in. The song was released as the B-side of Celebration's single, with the final G on Getting added back in, something absent from both Smiley Smile and the Celebration album, and we'll talk more about that single shortly. Back in the day, when everything was getting disco-fied, I was annoyed that Gettin' Hungry got the treatment. Like most of the things on this album, it's very much of its time, and what was once its weakness has now become its strength. All these years on, it's a fun, charming novelty, and it's become my favorite track on the album. Also, as disco remakes of Beach Boys songs go, I still prefer it to Here Comes the Night. Second is Dave Robinson and Ron Altbach's Sailor, sung by Robinson. It's not a bad song with some interesting rhythmic changes, maybe too many changes. It sounds a little off-kilter to me at points, and I think it obscures the hooks in the melody. The third track is Love Struck, another Robinson lead vocal on a song by Talea and Altbach. They might have been thinking of Elton John on this one. The piano and some of the melodic turns remind me of his early work. Nice verses and a slightly too simple chorus. It's pleasant, if unmemorable. Next up is She's Just Out to Get You, written and sung by Mike Love. American Spring had recently recorded their own version of this back on October 28, 1978. That eventually saw release in 1986 on the Swedish-only compilation It's Like Heaven, where it was credited to the Honeys, and on the Capitol Collectors series in 1992. It's a simple, okay song with a sort of mid-60s girl group feel to it, which really makes it more suitable to American Spring or the Honeys than it is to Mike and Celebration. For the first time on the album, Charles Lloyd's saxophone is showcased. Once again, Mike's vocal is pretty good. He sings with character and nuance. And again, whatever else was going on with Mike and the group at this period, Mike was probably singing better than at any other point in his career. Closing out side one is I Don't Wanna Know, written by Mike Love and sung by Dave Robinson. Mike had recorded a more disco-fied version of this in sessions in November and December of '78, for his unreleased solo album, First Love. There are some disco flourishes to Celebration's version, but overall it has a bluesier feel, down mostly to Dave Robinson's vocal. It also features some very nice saxophone from Charles Lloyd. It's a pretty good song, a strong effort from Mike. I imagine the Beach Boys passed it over as being unsuitable for their sound. Kicking off side 2 is Star Baby, written by Mike Love and featuring a very nice lead vocal from Paul Feuerso. It's a pleasant enough song with clearer hooks than some of the other material here. This is probably why it was chosen as the A-side of Celebration's single in the US, released on May 8, 1979, about 2.5 months after the album. Of course, that single, like the album, didn't chart. I find the female backing vocals in this are a bit obtrusive, and in places they obscure Feuerso's lead vocal, which really didn't need the support. The horn sound is great, but in places I think it also gets in the way of the vocal performance. I'm kind of surprised that the Beach Boys didn't do this one. It seems like it would be really well suited to a Carl lead vocal. Maybe relationships within the group at the time were such that Carl wasn't going to sing a Mike song. It doesn't seem particularly suited to Mike's voice, Maybe they tried it. Does anybody know, did the Beach Boys have a go at recording Star Baby? The next track up is Go and Get That Girl, sung by Dave Robinson. It was written by Tulea and Altbach, whose song Winds of Change had, of course, closed out the MIU album in 1978. Go and Get That Girl was also recorded by the Beach Boys during those Merry Christmas from the Beach Boys MIU sessions in the fall of 1977. It featured a lead vocal by Carl and was apparently under consideration for the Christmas album because the song contains the line, "Her love could make you feel like Christmas Day." Carl does his best with it, but it's kind of an awkward song, and it's understandable that even by the standards of the MIU album, it was passed over for release. The Celebration version is a bit more relaxed than the Beach Boys versions that I've heard, and comes across a little better. Robinson does a nice job with the lead vocal, but the song remains slightly awkward both musically and lyrically. Mike's third lead vocal comes on How's About a Little Bit, written by Brian Wilson, Diane Rovell, Mike, and Ron Altbach. The Beach Boys had recorded this for the MIU album under the slightly different title, How About a Little Bit of Your Sweet Love. Very late in the proceedings, that track, along with Our Team, were dropped from the album in favor of Al's versions of Come Go With Me and Peggy Sue. The change came so late, in fact, that in Byron Priest's 1979 book, they're talked about as part of MIU in his review of the album, in which he writes, How About a Little Bit of Your Sweet Love, Won't You Come Out Tonight, and Our Team were typical homespun Beach Boy tunes on the order of Good Time, and once again, a step fuller and more complex than Love You. The change in the lineup apparently came too late for Priest's text, though the discography in the book shows the correct final track lineup for MIU. We talked about that in more detail in episodes 106 and 107 about the MIU album. How's About a Little Bit is a simple song, and I get the feeling that producer Altbach piled on backing vocals and instrumentation in an attempt to build it up into something bigger. Sometimes it works, sometimes it just sounds a bit cluttered. The second to last track on the album, Song of Creation, is written by Dave Robinson and Ron Altbach and sung by Robinson. Mike Love had sung it at the USC show 10 months earlier. With a title like Song of Creation, you might be worried that you're getting a big, pompous, overblown prog rock extravaganza, like Spinal Tap's Stonehenge was meant to be. Fortunately, that is not what you get. It's another track with a reggae feel to it, and another of several tracks on the album that are slightly undermined by two complicated rhythms. As he does throughout the album, Robinson turns in a solid lead vocal. The female backing vocals on the choruses take it into almost Partridge Family territory. Maybe it's the expectation set up by the pretentious title, but with the production, it comes off as the most lightweight and trite song on what is undeniably a very lightweight album. The 10th and final track on the album is another Tulea and Altbach song, with Mike Love taking the lead vocal, though on the liner notes on the back of the album, credit for the lead vocal is given to Dave Robinson. He does feature in the choruses on the song. In episode 134, Almost Summer Part 2, Peter Flegg told us that when the Beach Boys played Australia in 1978 at the show he saw, Mike introduced a new song which he informed the audience was going to be the Beach Boys' next single. Peter remembered the song as not great but very pleasant and was looking forward to the single, which never materialized. When he finally heard it again, it was on the Celebration album titled Country Pie. You can find a Beach Boys Live in Australia version of Country Pie on YouTube from their appearance at the Meyer Music Bowl in Melbourne on May 9, 1978, which was filmed and broadcast on Australian television. This performance is probably more famous or infamous for being one of the rare occasions when Carl appeared wasted on stage and Dennis stepped up to help keep Carl on track. Before Country Pie, Mike coaches the audience through the lyrics to try to teach it to them so they can sing along. It's a pretty sloppy performance, especially as you'd expect from Carl, but they do it pretty much the same as the studio version on the Celebration album, with the horns more prevalent on stage and Charles Lloyd's sax solo being given more of a spotlight. From what I found, it appears the Beach Boys were doing Country Pie in concert prior to the Australia tour. It seems to have gotten its live Beach Boy debut on October 15, 1977 in Iowa City at the same concert that saw the live debut of Al's Lady Linda, co-written with Ron Altbach. Lady Linda appears in an early version in the Almost Summer film, but not on the soundtrack. Of course, it was released in 1979 on the Light album. From Peter Flegg's comments and from seeing this film on YouTube, it makes me think that there must almost certainly be a Beach Boys version of Country Pie that is a studio version around somewhere. I've seen it listed on some boots that I haven't heard. I'm not sure whether that's a live version or a studio version. Maybe somebody can let me know on that. In any case, it would have been an unusual choice for a Beach Boys single being written by Ed Talea and Ron Altbach. Of course, they had written Winds of Change, which was used on the MIU album, and the Beach Boys had a go at recording their Go and Get That Girl. The song first appeared on King Harvest's 1975 self-titled album. At the time, Talea and Altbach were members of the band along with Dave Robinson. Incidentally, Mike, Carl, Billy Hinchy, and Peter Cetera of Chicago all contribute backing vocals to the song Via on this album, which was recorded at Brothers Studios in Santa Monica. As Peter Flegg so aptly put it, the song Country Pie is not great but pleasant. It's simple and catchy. It probably works better in concert. It's simple enough for Mike to teach the lyrics to the audience so they can sing along, and catchy enough to threaten to become an annoying earworm after only a few listens. Say what you will about the Light album, everything on it, apart maybe from Shortening Bread, is stronger than Country Pie, so it's hard for me to imagine them releasing it as a Beach Boys single. Celebration's version of Country Pie was released as a single A-side in Germany. Getting Hungry was the B-side. Unsurprisingly, it didn't chart. Honestly, I prefer King Harvest's version of Country Pie, which seems more fleshed out and fully realized than the kind of frenetic version on the Celebration album. Really, this is a stronger album in every way. So is the Light album and the MIU album, for that matter. And maybe that is the fundamental problem with albums like this. King Harvest was defunct, the Beach Boys were struggling, but nobody wanted to give up their A material for something that was clearly a side project. In an interview on Nolan Carr's excellent Nolan Carr at Night YouTube channel, Ron Altbach recently said of the Celebration album, "It has good tunes on it. It's not a well-produced record. I produced it and it's not that great. I didn't have those kind of chops. The songs are real pop songs. It has its moments." Mike might have enjoyed working with some more mellow and centered musicians and had some fun. Celebration might have served to function as a kind of front for releasing those Almost Summer recordings or for spreading the word about TM. But I don't think Mike was under any serious delusions that lightning strikes twice that easily, and he knew the Beach Boys were going to remain his bread and butter for quite some time to come. They had, after all, just signed a big new lucrative contract with CBS Records. Their first album on that contract was coming out 3 weeks after the Celebration album. Mike's future and his income were inextricably linked to the Beach Boys. And I'm sure the other guys knew the score too. Despite jokes early on about waves and wings and the relative success of the Almost Summer single, I think everybody realized that this was pretty much a side project. There was a second Celebration album, Disco Celebration. From what I read in the 1981 Surf's Up book, I was long under the impression that the album had never been released. Apparently, it did see some limited release in either 1979 or 1980. The album has a 1979 date. Most of the sources that I see say it was released in 1980. In any case, this seems to be maybe an album that wasn't so much released as escaped. Interestingly, Surf's Up lists the album as recorded in late '78 before the Celebration album was released. They have the track list and sequence identical to what appeared on the album. Whether this is really a Celebration album or something else is open to debate. According to the liner notes, Mike Love doesn't appear on the album, nor does Dave Robinson. Ron Altbach is listed as producer but not as a player. Charles Lloyd appears once on California Girls. In fact, California Girls has an entirely different group of players from any other track on the album. It also features Beach Boys band stalwarts including Ed Carter and Mike Kowalski, and Wells Kelly on bass. Celebration performed a similar version of California Girls at least as far back as the USC show in April '78. Because it has a completely different lineup from the rest of the album, I'm guessing it was left in the can from some earlier recording session and thrown on the album to help fill it out. The main thing I can say for this instrumental disco version of California Girls is that it at least reminds me of how good the original was and makes me want to pull that one out for one more listen. Mainly, this seems to be Paul Feuerso's album. He appears on every track except California Girls and sings lead on 2 of them. Kevin Brandon and Kim Calkins, who played bass and guitar respectively on the Celebration album, are also on those tracks. Tim Weston, who played guitar on the Celebration album, plays on 1 track, First Love. Suzanne Wallach, who was among the background singers on Celebration, provides lead vocal on 2 tracks. Guitarist Jerry Donahue appears on 3 tracks. The Surf's Up book had it that Mike sings backing vocals on the otherwise instrumental California Girls. He's not credited on the album's sleeve, though none of the backing vocalists are credited on that track. Having heard it, he might very well be in there. If there's a draw for Beach Boy fans on this album, it's that Mike is credited as co-writer, along with Ron Altbach, on 3 of the album's 4 originals. The other one is written by Paul Feuerso. Ironically, it's First Love, the title track from Mike's unreleased solo album, which would have been recorded around the same time. Copies of this album usually run around the $200 mark, which is just too rich for me. I keep holding out hope that I will find it in a dollar bin one of these days. It's another terrible album cover, actually worse than the Celebration cover. On the positive side, it does have a central image. That image, though, could not possibly be more generic. It appears that the cover photo was just taken from a book of stock images rather than being created specifically for the album. This looks like it belongs in a dollar bin. At least there are some reasonably detailed liner notes on the back, and this cover does fairly represent the contents of the album, that is, undistinguished, rather anonymous disco tunes. It's kind of hard to imagine what the point of this album was. Of course, we've talked about in other episodes, this was a period where it was largely believed, and not without reason, that you could slap the word disco on just about anything and there was a pretty good chance it would sell. This apparently didn't. It features all of the usual late 70s disco tropes and isn't inherently worse than a lot of other disco music that was being released around the same time. Mainly, there's nothing really to distinguish it from any of those hundreds of other albums either. You can hear this on YouTube on Alora's amazing channel. I'd be really interested to learn more about Disco Celebration, as undistinguished as it is. I wonder if maybe Mike, Ron Altbach, and Charles Lloyd intended to be more involved in it, and either other commitments or waning enthusiasms or early signs of a disco backlash changed their minds. This seemingly brings us to the end of the Celebration project. I look forward to your feedback. If anybody can help me out with whether the Beach Boys recorded any of those songs on the Celebration album that I didn't know about, and if anybody has any more information on that Disco Celebration album, I would love any of the arcane details of that. I know this is a sort of small and peripherally Beach Boy related area of their history, but hope you enjoyed it all the same. Look forward to your comments. Please hit like and subscribe, and we'll see you next week. Thanks. Bye.